All right. Well, hello, everybody. All right. Well, hello, everybody. So here we are, going to be taking a dive into Act 1, Scenes 1 through 4 of Macbeth. I would say treat this like you would, an in-class lecture, as if I was up at the board going through this scene with you, uh, as if, the text was there on the board as well. And, as such, take notes, have your copy of Macbeth with you on hand, annotate it as we go through it, highlight, underline things along the way, jot down notes in the margins, all that kind of good stuff. Take full advantage of this. And the great thing is that, you don't have to do it all in class. If we were to do this in class, you can start some of this, come back to it later, study it at your own pace. And, if you need to review, come back and check it out again. All right. And then if you have questions, then we can take care of those in class. All right. Well, with that, let's go ahead and dive in here. So, Act 1, Scene 1. 3 witches. Of course, as you watch this scene, most productions, it's pretty evident that we're dealing with witches, that we're dealing with the supernatural right here. But of course, with Shakespeare, if you're coming to this play completely fresh, and if we're just reading it, then there are some things that we need to take a look at in order to understand this. So, the whole thing that's worth noting is that we're starting off with a question. When shall we three meet again? So there's already a sense of kind of uncertainty right off the bat. This is something that Shakespeare actually does quite a bit, opening lines beginning with questions, thus requiring an answer. So we're already, as an audience, inquisitive as to what's going on. So, when shall we three meet again, in thunder, lightning, or in rain? And the second witch, this is where we get the indication that, well, we're dealing with some supernatural beings right here, since they seem to be able to predict the future to some capacity or another. When the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's lost and won, so we're already pinpointing the fact that there is a conflict at play. And so, if you're sitting in the balcony, for example, you know that this is probably within nations, this is probably within between kings, and so there's power at play here. And of course, if you're in the gallery, then you're looking and saying, well, how is Shakespeare getting this plot off the ground? And if you're in the pit, then you're like, ooh, there's a battle happening. All right. That will be ere the set of sun, so they know when this battle is going to be ending. As we'll see in scene 2, the conclusion and victor and winner and loser of the battle is anything but a done deal. Where the place upon the heath, this is essentially just a barren patch of ground, so once again you kind of get the sense of after the battle there's going to be desolation. And there, to meet with Macbeth. And it's worth noting that within our first scene, and honestly within our first 2 scenes, we never actually meet Macbeth. All that we do is hear about him. And at this point, we see that 3 witches are getting ready to meet with Macbeth. That can't mean anything good for Macbeth or the parties associated with him. Then you get these couple of lines right here. I'll just go ahead and throw this out there. This would be a clear indication to Shakespeare's audience that we do have witches here. First witch, I come Grey Malkin. Second witch, Paddock calls. Grey Malkin, Paddock, these would be names for their familiar spirits, which would often be animals. That might be a term that you've heard before, a witch's familiar. And so this is kind of an indication for sure that they are witches. Oftentimes these animals would be associated with demons, and so you know that they're evil, that they're up to no good. And then we get a classic line from the play right off the bat. Fair is foul, and foul is fair, hover through the fog and filthy air. And so right from the top, you can tell that the witches are here to confuse what is good and what is evil, and that they are going to be essentially dropping a fog on the scene and on the characters, creating that confusion of what is good and what is evil. And this is actually a line that we'll see echoed by Macbeth upon his first appearance, as we'll see later on. Okay, jumping to scene 2. Enter King Duncan, Malcolm, Donalbain, Lennox, attendants. Of course, King Duncan, we get that right off the bat. Malcolm and Donalbain, those are his sons, Malcolm being the eldest, Donalbain being the youngest. Hence, Malcolm would actually be heir to Duncan's throne, an important fact that we'll see later on as well. Okay, so Duncan asking about the bloody man. Worth noting that the first line of dialogue that we see in scene 2 is once again a question. There is a sense of uncertainty, of nobody really knowing what's coming from where here. Okay. Malcolm notes that this is a sergeant who actually fought against my captivity, so he actually welcomed, or I should say rescued, the king's son from being taken captive during this battle, so he already has some clout and some reputation here. All right, the captain. Doubtful it stood, as two spent swimmers that do cling and choke their art. This is basically communicating that the outcome of the battle was totally uncertain, and in fact, their forces were completely desperate. If you can imagine, in your mind's eye, two swimmers in the middle of an ocean who have been out there for who knows how long, they're completely exhausted, they're spent, and they're at the point where they're trying to cling together to stay afloat. And of course, when you have two exhausted swimmers who are trying to use the other as, essentially like a life raft to keep them afloat, then both are going to end up drowning. This is a desperate situation. The merciless MacDonald, here's our first rebel, our first traitor from the ranks of Duncan fighting against him, worthy to be a rebel, for to that the multiplying villainies of nature do swarm upon him. He's an utter villain as a rebel here as well. If you're in the balcony, you're noticing that, somebody's rebelling against the king. That is a direct threat to the great chain of being. Nothing good happening there. Okay. All right. So it seems we see Fortune here personified, capital F. Fortune smiling, showed like a rebel swore. Everything seems to be going MacDonald's way, but nevertheless, all's too weak for brave Macbeth. Well, he deserves that name, to say brave. Disdaining Fortune. He doesn't care what Fortune thinks. He doesn't care that Fortune is smiling on MacDonald. With his brandished steel, that is to say his sword, which smoked with bloody execution like Valor's minion, carved out his passage till he faced the slave. He's literally slicing his way through an army till he comes face to face with MacDonald, and ne'er shook hands with him, nor bade farewell to him, doesn't even give MacDonald a chance to surrender or to flee, to retreat, till he unseamed him from the nave to the chops, which is one of the grossest, most violent images that Shakespeare has ever written. If you can imagine somebody getting stabbed in the navel and then being, unseamed like a teddy bear from the navel all the way to the chops to his jaw. That's what we have here. And then decapitated, he fixed his head upon our battlements. Duncan, this is great. This seems like things are going our way. But not so fast. Mark, King of Scotland, Mark, no sooner justice had, with valor armed, compelled these skipping kerns to trust their heels, but the Norwegian lord, who is the leader, the king of Norway, surveying vantage with furbished arms and new supplies of men, began a fresh assault. So even though MacDonald's taken off the field, the Norwegian king sees an opportunity and thus redoubles his efforts. Well, Duncan, dismayed this not our captains, Macbeth and Banquo? Well, as it should. They've just fought and defeated a whole army, and here comes another army. And Captain responds, yes, as Sparrow's eagles are harrow the lion. This is a little joke thrown in here for all you folks sitting in the gallery. Oh, were they dismayed? Oh, of course, yeah, they were about as afraid as an eagle is of a sparrow, or about as afraid as a lion is of a bunny. I say sooth. If I say sooth, I must report they were as cannons overcharged with double cracks, so they redoubled strokes upon the foe. It's almost like they get a second wind here. Except they meant to bathe in reeking wounds or memorize another Golgotha. I cannot tell. This is an interesting line right here, because he's saying, well, it seems like Macbeth and Banquo started fighting double hard, but he couldn't tell whether they were fighting because they really believed that they could win, or to memorize another Golgotha. Of course, this is a Jesus reference right here, the crucifixion. So are they fighting because they believe that they can win, or are they fighting as a way of just self-sacrifice for the most honorable death that they can muster? He can't really tell. And so the soldier here, it's worth noting, doesn't actually see the end of the battle. All that he sees was Macbeth and Banquo running into battle. He doesn't know how it all ended. Thus, we have two, Ross and Angus, enter. Go ahead and pause here, and you can note on the side that when we're talking about Ross and Angus, we're talking about thanes. And thanes are essentially another title for Scottish noblemen. If you look at the list of characters at the beginning of your text, you'll see them listed just that way, noblemen of Scotland. And so thane is a title attributed just like duke or baron would be in the British Isles today. It's also worth noting that unlike characters like Macbeth and Banquo, when we see Ross and Angus, these aren't proper names. These are more titles as well. They are the Thane of Ross, the Thane of Angus, whereas we have Macbeth, as we'll see, is Macbeth the Thane of Glamis. So, and these titles are important, as we'll see. Who comes here? Another question. Worthy Thane of Ross. There you go. Okay. So, Ross basically picks up where the captain left off and tells us how things went down. So, Norway himself, with terrible numbers, assisted by that most disloyal traitor, the Thane of Cawdor. So once again, we don't have a proper name, but we have a title, the Thane of Cawdor. He's our second rebel who's going against Duncan here. Began a dismal conflict till that Bellona's bridegroom, Lapton Proof, of course he's referring to Macbeth here, confronted him with self-comparisons, point against point, rebellious arm against arm, curbing his lavish spirit, and to conclude, the victory fell on us. So once again, Macbeth essentially wins the battle single-handedly and defeats the rebel again. All right. That now Sweno, that's Norway's king, craves composition, so he's surrendering. Nor would we deign him burial of his men till he dispersed at St. Colm's Inch $10,000 to our general use. This is kind of speaking to the brutality of warfare in these days, that all these men have died, and the winning army, that is to say Scotland, won't even let him bury his men until he basically, pays up a ransom. All right. Sorry about that. Duncan chimes in, no more that Thane of Cawdor shall deceive our bosom interests. Go pronounce his present death, and with his former title greet Macbeth. Here's an important thing to note. That Macbeth, since he is the hero of this battle and of this war, is about to get a promotion. Like we said earlier, he was the Thane of Glamis. He is about to inherit the title of Thane of Cawdor. With that comes new riches, new servants, new castle, new land, all that kind of good stuff. As you can see right here, Duncan saying again, what he hath lost, noble Macbeth hath won. So the Thane of Cawdor is about to be executed, and everything that he had awarded to Macbeth for his courage and his bravery. All right, scene